How's it going, everyone? Today we have Kurt Fraser on with us. Kurt, a former 7-year pro, also played in the BCHL and NCAA, spent 3 AHL seasons. With signing 1-year contracts, he spent time at NHL training camps, Calgary, Phoenix, St. Louis, Colorado, and Pittsburgh, and also spent time overseas in Italy and in the Austrian League. Kurt also he runs and owns the Fraser Valley Sturgeon hockey program in Langley, British Columbia, and also is one of the directors of the HPL high performance level. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Kurt, so through your experiences through hockey, minor hockey, junior, college, pro, what are some things that you can share with us and anything for the players, parents, and coaches?
Yeah, I grew up I played Cloverdale minor hockey, Cloverdale Colts. Typical hockey family. Dad puts you in hockey, all that stuff. My dad played hockey growing up a little bit, and kind of started from there. I was a pretty small kid. I'm not so small anymore, but at the time, we it was back in the day, as size played such a factor in the old style hockey, that hook and hold. And you had to kind of be that, a bigger guy, to have success in a game, which we both know now isn't the case, but we can talk about that later. But when we were growing up, size was king. I think we were talking before the call began, is saying that the Western Hockey League draft, I was 5'6" for a kid out of Cloverdale. There's no way I'm getting drafted with that stature. So I kind of went through there, and I just kept going and kept playing. Ended up playing Junior B, where all the Frasers have played, for Grant Kerr there for the Port Coquitlam Buckaroos. And I think I started the season there at 5'6", and I finished at 6'2". And then that was it. Now all of a sudden I was on everyone's radar. Western Hockey League, BC Junior. Ultimately, my dad, RCMP, 35 years, always wanted me to have a college education. So with that, he was always kind of pushing the college route. And I ended up in Victoria, on Vancouver Island, playing there. Had a great first season. I had 70 points as a 17-year-old, talking to every school. If I'm being 100% honest, I thought I was pretty awesome. And I had my 18-year-old year reflected what I thought. It was a big learning experience year where, if you don't put the work in, you're not going to get it out. And at 18, I went from 70 points to 36. So I think it was pretty obvious that that I had some growing up to do before I was ready to be a hockey player. At 19, same thing, couldn't get it together. I had a couple coaches that were influencing me with my size to fight a bit more. So I kind of did that.
Yeah.
And which I wasn't a fighter by any means. As a 17-year-old, I was a scorer. By 19, I was a fighter. And what good is that going to get you? Especially in, coming out of the BC Junior League, you gotta put up some sort of points. They don't need a fighter in college. You're all wearing masks, cages, right? But I kind of had a turning point with a guy by the name of Pete Zaberski, which everyone knows from the Vancouver Island, embedded in the hockey community. I don't think he's doing that anymore, but he was for a long time.
He is. He's actually owner of Junior B Peninsula Panthers still.
Oh, okay.
So I still run.
Yes, he owned that when I was playing too. And I love telling this story because it was pretty crazy. So I'm 20 years old and I walk into Pete's office and I said, I want to trade. Yeah. And he said, okay. So he started going through all the players that had the same amount of points as me. And he's like telling me all these players. And I'm like, well, I'm better than that guy. 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 And Pete goes, well, no, you're not. You're the same. So I'm not trading you. And I'm like trying to be like, it's my first big adult, meeting with the GM. And I said, no, I want to trade Pete. And he's like, no, I'm not trading you. He's like, I'll trade you on one condition. I'm like, what's the condition? He said, you can't fight. You can't take a 10-minute misconduct. Right. And no bad penalties. And I'm like, deal. Right. So we go into the season. First game, I got a fight, 10-minute misconduct. Right. And Pete's just looking at me. He's like, hey, I need 10 games with no fights and no 10 misconducts. Then you get traded. I'm like, okay. So he's like, we're starting over. Same thing. Games 2, games 3, games 4. I'm just a mess. I'm fighting. I'm getting 10s. I'm yelling at the ref, blah, blah. He looks at me, he goes, Curtis, we're starting over. 10 games. You got to give me 10 games. So I call my dad and I'm like losing my mind about Pete. And my dad's like, Curtis, just do what he says.
Right.
Just don't fight and don't take a 10. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I said, for 10 games, I'm going to commit to this, right? And I went off. I had like 15 points in 8 games or something. And then Alaska Fairbanks came and they said, hey, you want a scholarship? I'm like, well, yeah, obviously I do. They said, okay, well, you have 24 hours to decide. 24 hours, like who gives 24 hours? Right. So I'm like, okay, like here I go. Like I put it together for 10 games and I got a scholarship now. Like this is crazy. Pete was right. Now he's a genius.
Yeah.
So I continue. I finish the 10 games. I take the scholarship to Alaska. And after 10 games, Pete comes to me and goes, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I don't want to go. And he's like, oh, you're going, buddy. So where do you want to go? You
Wow,
can pick your team. You can pick your team. I'm like, I don't want to go. 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 And he's like, you're going. What team do you want? Right. And I'm like, no, I'm not going. And I just storm out of his office. Right. And anyways, from then on, like I just went right back to that 17-year-old year. And, I led the league in goals. I think I was tied with Alex Nikiforuk in points. I think I had 53 goals. And then it was all over. Then I went to NCAA, had a good college career, great coaches. Guy Godowski, he's now at Penn State, Tavis McMillan at Denver University, Dallas Ferguson, Denver University. So that's kind of how I got to NCAA. And then pro happened after that.
Yeah. So just going over what you just said, that's an amazing story. And yeah, definitely one of the, how do you say it, more interesting stories I think I've had on these video podcasts. So that's, I hope the not only the kids and the players, of course, to listen in, but obviously the players, the parents and the coaches too. But for the kids, really important to go over what you just said there is it's so important to listen and the coachability. If you were just to do things right the very first time before going over to the third time of listening to Pete Zabriskie on what had to happen, not only for you to get traded, but more so as a person, as a player, to just, bring it back a little bit with the 10s and the fighting and just showcase your skills, what you could do. Obviously, looking at your stats, amazing numbers. Even I'm looking here, your first year in the BCHL for the Salsa, you must have been 17 years old at the time or 16?
Yeah, 17.
17. So that's still a young age coming into the BCHL, but 66 points in 57 games. Like that, you're getting eyes on you right away. And probably, you're probably playing with some pretty good players as well